As a Windows user, you may be thinking about abandoning ship in light of Microsoft's ongoing faux pas and generally ham-fisted handling of privacy, the Windows feature set, and the push to get everyone onto Windows 11. While Windows 10 is an older operating system, it was introduced in 2015, Microsoft is insisting that even fairly recent computers are not suitable and must be replaced. Because, line must go up. In that light, some of you may be considering moving to Apple products. As someone who uses Windows at work and Linux at home, I can say that switching to macOS from Windows or Linux can feel like a big shift, especially if you're new to Apple's ecosystem. I've been using an M1 MacBook Air for several months now alongside my Linux laptop. Before you make the move, here are the main obvious differences you'd notice right away as a macOS beginner. First of all, the various Apple computers for the past 4 years or so use the M series chips, M1, M2, etc. This applies to both Mac desktop computers and the MacBook laptops. Windows and Linux predominantly run on so-called x86 chips by Intel or AMD. Apple's M series chips are designed by Apple and use a different architecture called ARM. Generally speaking, you can't run Windows or Linux on M series Apple hardware, nor can you run macOS on x86 hardware. Before someone jumps in the comments, I know there are special cases. I'm talking about an everyday user who just buys a computer for Best Buy or Walmart to use at home or at school. Got it? Okay. So on macOS, there's no start menu. Instead, you get the dock, a bar at the bottom by default with app icons for quick access. It's like a simplified taskbar but focused on launching apps rather than managing windows. The menu bar is at the top of the screen and changes depending on the active app, unlike Windows app-specific menus or Linux's various setups. It's not part of the application window. It's always there, which can feel unfamiliar at first. Windows minimize, maximize, close buttons are replaced by red, yellow, and green dots in the top left corner of Windows, and they behave slightly differently. For example, yellow minimizes to the dock, red usually closes the app window but not the app itself. Instead of File Explorer in Windows or the various file managers in Linux, macOS uses Finder. It's simpler but less customizable. macOS is based upon a version of Unix, and similarly to Linux, you will not see any drive letters like C or D, just folders or mounted drives like a USB drive. macOS also tends to hide a lot of the deeper file system unless you really dig intentionally. Paths like documents or downloads feel similar, but macOS leans heavily into iCloud integration, which might prompt you to save stuff online more than you're used to. Apple keyboards have a slightly different layout from Windows or Linux, just enough to be initially confusing or frustrating. The Command key replaces Control as the main modifier for shortcuts. For example, Command-C to copy instead of Control-C. This can trip up your muscle memory the first few times around. There's no Alt key. It's called Option, and the layout includes a few other macOS-specific quirks. Windows has .exe files, Linux has package managers or app image files, but macOS leans on the Mac App Store, or DMG files if you download an app from a website. To install a DMG file, you double-click a file to open it, then drag the icon into the Applications folder, which is really easy, if not immediately obvious. Uninstalling is usually as easy as dragging the application to the trash icon. macOS doesn't maximize Windows the way Microsoft Windows does. Clicking the green dot often enters full screen mode, splitting it from your desktop entirely. Windows snapping or tiling is oddly only a recent addition to macOS, but it works well enough in most cases. macOS, as I said, is tied to Apple hardware, so there's no driver hunting like on Windows or even Linux. Everything usually just works, webcam, trackpad, display, but you lose the customization freedom you might be used to, like swapping graphics cards. If you're on a MacBook, the trackpad is very nice and loaded with multi-touch gestures, for example, 2-finger scroll, 3-finger app switching. Windows and Linux both also have gesture support, but macOS does make it feel more polished and integrated out of the box. For someone with little macOS exposure, the biggest shock is probably how streamlined, or some might say restrictive, it feels. Less tinkering compared to Linux and less chaos compared to Windows. Apple wants you to use it their way. You will often hear Apple users wax lyrical about how intuitive macOS is. I personally did not find that to be so, but it's not horrible, and you can pretty quickly get used to it. My main reason for hanging onto my little MacBook Air is that the hardware is very nice. It's lightweight, silent, has a great screen and battery life, and I have learned to live with macOS. You might too. Hey, thanks for watching. Take care. Catch you next time.